I thought Linda's description for this service was spot on. Travel often teaches us something about ourselves more than anything else, and sometimes it's something really great, like an intrinsic love for exploring or a new appreciation for art. As I learned in 2001 on my first overseas trip, though, sometimes what you learn about yourself falls more into the things I need to work on category. And that's good too. In August of 2001, my brother Will and I went on a 3-week backpacking trip in England and Ireland. I was 22 and had just graduated from college. He was 20 and was swayed to go with his big sister, in part because we truly do get along well, but also because the thought of being able to legally buy a drink in a pub was pretty darn exciting. Here's how the trip was supposed to work. Fly into London, do a slight northern arc through England, take the ferry from Liverpool over to Dublin, do a loop through Ireland, and then we were supposed to take the ferry from Dublin back over to Liverpool and do a southern arc through England. Instead, we ended up in Wales. Here's another thing I learned on my trip. In Ireland, still a very, very religious country, everything is closed or wraps up early on Sundays, and this includes ferry boat schedules. We missed the boat, literally. When Will and I got to the dock that Sunday afternoon and realized what happened, we were hardly prepared with a plan B. Luckily, the ticketing agents were helpful. They directed us to the counter of another ferry company who had a boat going to Holyhead, Wales. We figured we would at least get on the right island that way, even though it would be dumping us off in a country we weren't supposed to be in at 3 o'clock in the morning. We bought the tickets. Will remembers that we had to run just to catch the boat. I had re-injured my knee earlier in our trip, so Will was carrying both of our packs, one on his back, one on his front, while I hobbled along behind him as fast as I could. But we made it. At this point, the way my brother tells it is when he felt relief. There, we were going to be on the right side of the Irish Sea, we caught the boat, done. He ordered a Jameson whiskey and got himself some Burger King on the ship to celebrate. I, on the other hand, had merely stopped my initial phase of panicking. I wasn't remotely done worrying. I spent the entire boat ride trying to figure out how we would find a place to sleep at 3 a.m. in Holyhead, a place I had not bought a travel guide for, a place I had not studied. I worried about the room reservation we had for the next night and how we were going to get back on track when we were going to be in the wrong country. I even worried, I'm embarrassed to admit now, about what kind of money they used in Wales. The fact that they're a part of the UK completely escaping me at the time. I had pre-ordered money for England and Ireland before the trip. I was not prepared for Wales in so many ways. But ready or not, at 3 a.m., we disembarked at the Holyhead ferry terminal. My brother, who had grown increasingly relaxed on the boat ride, had decided long before I would reach this point that the whole thing was pretty darn funny. He had ordered several more drinks, and so we found ourselves facing the dark, deserted streets of Holyhead, me stressed out, Will blissed out. But then, 2, 3 fortuitous things happened in pretty short succession. One, I found an ATM right away and was relieved and a bit sheepish when I had some money in hand. Of course, I already had British pounds on hand, but whatever. There was a line of cab drivers who were queued up outside the terminal. After a few minutes of trying to figure out what to do, I went up to one and just said, "Could you please just take us somewhere where we could sleep tonight?" He very kindly replied that he could, or we could just walk up the hill and go to the third house on the left, and the woman there runs a B&B, and she stays open late for ferry passengers. I know now I should have tipped him. I was so grateful for his assistance. The third thing was that even though we had dilly-dallied for a long time, and she had almost gone to bed, the woman who owned the B&B was still up. And when she peeked through her curtains, she thought we looked like respectable people. Good thing she couldn't smell my brother's breath. For a few hours, we had a place to sleep. You can guess the rest. We figured out the train schedules, we got back on track, everything turned out just fine. We didn't have time to see much of Wales except from the train, but we did buy one thing, a postcard to send to our parents. It was cut out in the shape of a pair of hands gripping the edge of a bar, an empty shot glass in between them. On the back we wrote 3 a.m., ended up in Wales, whoops. At some point, when things started feeling more under control, I realized the goofy turn our adventure had taken. No one was hurt, no irreparable damage done. I realized what my brother had glommed onto much earlier. This is kind of funny, and there's nothing we can do but just roll with it now. I wish I could say it's a lesson that sunk in so deeply that it has changed the way I travel ever since, but I'm still a planner. I still prefer for things to go how I expect them to go, but when they don't, and they don't, I try to remember this. Is anyone hurt? No? Good. Then this is probably going to make a good story later. Roll with it.
Ishtanadya, God be with you. This is how Transylvanian Unitarians greet other Unitarians in hallways, in streets, when they enter a room. Ishtanadya. The sermon today is in two voices. One is my own and reflects my experience in Transylvania, and the second includes excerpts from a sermon written by Maria Papp, a Unitarian minister, as published in a book called Humble in Front of God, Words of Worship from Transylvanian Unitarians. When I wrote to Maria to ask if I could use her sermon, she responded with, "Use it any way you'd like." And Laura will play the part of Maria. Her words are Maria's words. You want to test your mic?
Everybody hear me? Good.
C.S. Lewis writes, "One who has journeyed in a strange land cannot return unchanged." Meadville Lombard, one of our two Unitarian Universalist seminaries in the U.S., offered the opportunity to be a Transylvanian scholar. The successful applicant, the email read, would travel to Transylvania, which is in Romania, stay at the Unitarian seminary there, help teach English to the students, and have an opportunity to travel, to be immersed in the Unitarian life there. That's where Unitarian faith has its origins. I had no intention of going. None. I wasn't going to apply. I had no business considering it. I was way too busy. I was too busy already, not adding anything else. I couldn't leave for that long, and it's all my husband's fault. It's often that way. The good things that happen in my life, they're my husband's fault. "How can you not apply?" he said. "You might get to go. The odds are with you." So I did. We rose at 2:30 in the morning, if you can call that morning, to be able to make the first of 3 flights. Liftoff was at 6 a.m. 3 miles into the car ride to Des Moines, a raccoon chose to cross the road in just such a way as to get caught in the wheel well of our car. Jarring, to say the least, and disheartening and a little foreboding for a woman who has never been overseas. I'm really a reluctant traveler. and I'm not fond of traveling alone. A half a mile later, there's a terrible scraping sound from under the car. We're never going to make it, I think, never. Husband Mark gets out and in a very manly fashion rips the plastic lining that once served as part of the wheel well from out under the car and threw it in the back seat. Away we go. No worries. In our opening words today, we were asked to bring our gifts to the altar of humanity. Now, I wasn't sure what gifts would be most helpful or even welcome, but I brought my curiosity, my willingness to try new things, and a desire to learn. Please don't doubt that I considered this a privilege. It was an honor to get to go, and I didn't take that lightly. When I arrived in Cluj, which is Romanian, or Kolosovar, which is the Hungarian name for the same city, finally, 23 hours after leaving home, the plane landed at an airport that did look like something out of a 1980s movie about Soviet bloc countries. Even the tiniest of ornamentation or welcome was absent. I stood in line, passport in hand, and simply followed what everyone else was doing. Stand single file, wait your turn. Move to the glass-enclosed counter where there was a rather cross-looking official. I handed over my passport. He looked at it, he looked at me, he looked at it, he looked at me, and then said, "Business or visiting?" He said it in English. "Visiting," I replied. He stamps my passport and returns it to me.
We belong to a minority ethnic group, Hungarians living in Romania, feeling always threatened in our heritage and culture, a group whose loyalty for the state is always under suspicion and whose members feel many times second-rate citizens. For you, as American citizens, this is hard to understand, as you have the safety and assurance of a belonging to your country, which was never questioned.
Transylvania is in Romania. It was under communist rule from 1947 to 1989, 4 decades, 2 generations. I met those that remembered before communist rule, those that were born and came of age under communism, and those that were born after the fall. Each of these generations holds a different perspective. Each of these Unitarian generations, though, was born into their religion. It's inherited. It's part of one's identity. I gathered my luggage and searched a small sea of faces in front of the airport, and I see a woman, maybe a little younger than myself. Maybe she's supposed to pick me up. She is intense. She says, "Linda?" "Yes?" "I am Maria." And then she does this, which was the best part. I'm in. And so begins my adventure in Transylvania. Maria, I learned, is the secretary to the bishop, and she is a Unitarian minister. One of the first women ministers ever ordained in Transylvania. She has moved to the city and taken a job as secretary so that her daughter can get a better education, and so have more opportunities than she would have living in the village. I also learned that Maria spent a couple of years in California at Star King, the other Unitarian Universalist seminary. She knows our theology.
We live in a country so small that it's hard to find it on the map, and our language so weird that nobody really bothers to learn it. In contrast, your country is a superpower of the world, and your language is the lingua franca of today.
I stayed in a small dorm room. The building was large and housed the Unitarian seminary students on my floor and the Unitarian high school students in another wing. I dragged my luggage up 5 flights of stairs to reach my room. There are no elevators. Dinner with Nora, the English teacher, proved to be the beginning of a continuing friendship. I asked her to show me the city. Much to her amusement, my jaw dropped at every corner. Beautiful European architecture, a Catholic church with buttresses, cobblestone streets. It was awesome. I was utterly dependent on my host, as I could never have found my way home after going down alleyways and diagonal streets that have been traversed by people for hundreds of years. Hundreds. She laughed at me as I took pictures of everything. I learned that there are religious neighborhoods. The one I'm housed in covers a block or more, and it was returned to the Unitarians after the fall of communism. There was also Catholic, Orthodox, and Reformed neighborhoods. Imagine a Unitarian neighborhood.
We are born into our religious community, while you have chosen yours. We have no choice in the matter, which is why sometimes we are so careless with our heritage, taking it for granted, while you give all your best abilities to further the cause you have chosen.
Part of my experience included 4 days in the village. I stayed with Leos, the minister of our partner church with the Ames congregation, and his wife, Tunda. My first impressions included watching a family plant potatoes using a single horse and plow to dig the furrow. Everybody had grapevines and the larger gardens, milk cows and pigs in barns adjacent to their homes. The streets were dirt and curved and uneven and so well worn they were like pavement. Surrounding the village were acres and acres of apples and plums. These orchards had just begun to bloom.
We are simple people, with most of our congregations in villages and most of our parishioners farmers eking out painstakingly a living from the land, people who do not travel further than the nearby small town, whose dreams and aspirations never soar above the land they inhabit. In contrast, you are overeducated, sophisticated people with exquisite tastes, with many of you widely traveled and well-versed in the ways of the world.
We visited churches. They were made of stone and wood. The women sat on one side and the men sat on the other. And in the end, I thought it was just so they could look at each other. I did. The minister would preach from a pulpit that was elevated about 6 feet off the floor and accessible only by a narrow staircase. The sanctuary was highly ornamented with embroidery, no crosses, just embroidery. Embroideries with red on white linen, nearly all of it floral in design. And painted in many churches were more flowers, even on the ceiling. It was perennial springtime. The symbol of the Transylvanian Unitarians is a dove representing peace, and a snake that forms a circle by consuming its own tail. This frames the dove. The serpent represents wisdom. The take-home for me is, know peace, but be wise, be clever. It's a recipe for survival, I think. In return for my trip, I was to offer the Unitarian seminary students and ministers a chance to discuss religion and theology and church in general in English. The hope was that by spending time in discussion with a native speaker, I never thought of myself that way, with a native speaker, these students would be better prepared to be in relationship with their partner churches in the U.S. and in Canada. And in all the churches that I visit, there was always a small, usually piece of fabric from their partner churches in North America. These partner churches are really important. This was the task of my second week. There were 4 ministers and 12 seminary students in my classroom, but to tell you the truth, what I really wanted was to learn more from them.
We are Christian in our theology, while many of you have left behind traditional Christian communities to search for your own spiritual freedom. And for many of you, every reminder is full of pain.
We talked about Emerson and Channing. We talked about Unitarian Universalism in America and the Unitarian theology that we practice. It was so interesting. At first, I thought we are very, very different in our theologies. But as we spent time together, I began to change my mind.
We put the community's needs before the individual ones, while for you, the individual's rights and aspirations shape your community.
They were astounded to learn that most U.S. Unitarian Universalists come to their religion by choice, not by inheritance. They thought that was intriguing. They looked surprised and rather impressed that someone could switch. I thought the ideas of the Unitarian high school and living in a neighborhood with so many who share my faith was really appealing. We learned that what we had become accustomed to, we took for granted. While attending the church services in Hungarian, the only way I could participate was by singing. I could at least read the syllables in the hymnals and sing along. I wanted to participate in the worst way. I was reminded that learning a language is easier if you sing. So in our English classroom, we started singing. I found the hymnal, the Singing the Living Tradition. It looked pretty crisp, like not a lot of people had paged through it. It was on the bookshelf. What could I sing without accompaniment? This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This is why you sang this morning. And they joined right in. They'd heard it. It was lovely. And then, from you I receive, to you I give. And we sang this on, and they have beautiful voices. After we learned that, then one of the students started singing, Country Road, Take Me Home. To which we all joined in. We just went on. It was so awesome. We cracked up, and then the ice was totally broken. Who knew? I was falling in love. Those students asked good questions about the authority of the Bible in our American churches. They reminded me proudly that it was there that Unitarian religion was founded when Francis David proclaimed that God was not divided, that God was one. God was not divided into the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, but one. And that Jesus was a man, a holy man, but a man nonetheless. And that it was here that religious tolerance was first legislated, declared in 1568 in the Edict of Torda, that people shall be free to practice the religion of their choosing and not be required to follow the faith of the king. This was unheard of in Europe, unheard of. King Sigismund, I've been trying to pronounce his name for over a year. King Sigismund was the only Unitarian king to have existed. He proclaimed that no one shall be reviled for his religion by anyone. I spent a little time with the Unitarian bishop. Yes, bishop. He's not appointed by God or anyone else, but elected for 6 years, a bit like our own Unitarian Universalist president. This man is charming. The kind of person you want to spend time with. He sparkles. Before I left, he, Maria, and I went out for dinner to discuss how things went. After we sat down, he says to me, 1 drink we'll have conversation. 2 drinks we'll be friends. And 3 drinks you'll tell me the truth. Drinks indeed continued to appear on the table, and Maria wisely chose soda. After our evening out, the bishop literally ran home. He's in his 60s. He ran home to put together a bottle of homemade personal palinka. It's a vodka-like liquor distilled from plum. This was not for me this time. This was a gift to my husband for giving me up for 2 weeks. I'm happy to report that it made it home. The highlight of my experience was my last day with the students. I had assigned them the task of writing and providing an American-style UU service. Not because ours is better or more relevant, but so they could practice their English and be comfortable with the format. They were divided into 4 groups, and they wrote sermons, planned readings, opening and closing words, and many included poetry. And so for an entire afternoon, we ministered to each other. I could finally understand the words of the sermons. They spoke of love. They spoke of walking the path of our lives together. It was clear to me that they were going to be good ministers. We sang all the songs we'd learned that week. Then one group got out a guitar and sang John Lennon's Imagine. Together we sang, "Imagine there's no heaven." And then, "Imagine no religion too. Imagine there's no country. Imagine a brotherhood of man. Imagine all the people sharing the world." Sharing all the world. That afternoon, that's what we did. We shared all the world. We were living for today. The final element of our service together was to pass the light of a single candle to one another, much like Christmas Eve services here, singing, "From you I receive, to you I give."
On the surface, we are very different, but the basic values of our lives are the same and have their roots in our faith. Find the common thread. You have the means and possibilities to visit us, to get to know us better, to be part, even if it is for a short period, of our life and our struggles.
That evening we shared a meal. We sang and we said grace. We laughed. At one point, Albert, a totally charming young man, knelt by my chair and said, "Linda, we have a gift for you." He shows me this brand new plain book wrapped by a red ribbon. "Now, we know it will just sit on your shelf. You will never read it. It's in Hungarian." It's a Bible. We all crack up, and I treasure this book I will never, ever read. I am so grateful, so grateful.
You have the awareness and sensibility to help us in restoring some balance in our partnership by accepting the gifts we can offer, our homes, our hearts, our gratitude, our community.
Ishtanadya. Spirit of love be with you, my friends, and my friends there in Transylvania. Ishtanadya. May it be so. Thank you.